I created a rubric to assess 2028 presidential hopefuls using historical patterns, and here's what I found. First, I created this rubric. You can pause the video to read it in full right now, but essentially what I did was analyze the 10 best presidents in American history through the lens of 5 different categories. Why they became popular, their domestic policy, their foreign policy, excluding conflicts that began during their presidency, their political alignment, and their age. Quick side note, the 10 best presidents were not my subjective opinion. I used the top 10 chosen by the 2024 Presidential Greatness Project. Abraham Lincoln, Franklin Roosevelt, George Washington, Theodore Roosevelt, Thomas Jefferson, Harry Truman, Barack Obama, Dwight Eisenhower, Lyndon Johnson, and John Kennedy. I then observed common trends among the presidents in these categories and assigned point values for which traits are more common. For instance, 6 of the 10 rose to prominence by advocating for change, so a modern candidate doing the same would receive 6 points. Then I used this formula to properly weight the points based on categorical importance and arrive at a percentage score. To get a better idea of how the rubric works before I start analyzing potential 2028 candidates, pause the video here and read this sample for the current president, Donald Trump. There are obviously going to be a lot of candidates in 2028, far too many to cover in this video, so instead I'll focus on 5 Democrats and 3 Republicans with large national profiles that fit different political archetypes. We'll look at the candidates in alphabetical order, so first up is Pete Buttigieg, a Democrat who is the former Secretary of Transportation. For this exercise, his archetype is a politician that leans heavily on charisma. Alright, so our first candidate here is Pete Buttigieg, so we'll go through the various categories. So first up we have rise to popularity. Pete Buttigieg definitely is seen as charismatic, so we'll check that one off. All the Democratic candidates in this exercise will be seen as pitching change, considering that their term would follow up a Trump administration, so we'll check that box off as well. Pete Buttigieg is definitely not a war hero, and he is connected to a previous administration, but not a particularly popular one, so we aren't going to check that box. I am going to check off the strong and capable leader, just because that is generally seen as connected with the charismatic and poised and confident, but that is possibly more up to interpretation. In the domestic policy category, once again, most of these candidates are going to be proposing significant changes. It is more common, that's why it's for 7 points instead of 3 points. Pete Buttigieg has campaigned a lot on issues like labor with a $15 minimum wage, so we'll check that one off. He's obviously not a fiscal conservative. He has focused a lot on rights and LGBTQ plus rights, diversity, stuff like that, so that would go there. And most Democrats have argued for something related to healthcare, the social safety net, so that will also be included there. In terms of foreign policy, Pete Buttigieg would probably fall into the first category of essentially a non-remarkable foreign policy. Most candidates fall into this section. There are only a few that are aggressive, and in this day and age, total neutrality is not a very common position. Pete Buttigieg and most of the Democratic Party do support free trade, as opposed to Trump's policies, which would fall into the latter, skeptical of free trade. In terms of political alignment, Pete Buttigieg may not be a progressive, but he is certainly a solidly left-wing candidate, so he would be in this category. And Pete Buttigieg, by the time of the election, would be 42 to 49 years old, and that will be all, so I will now calculate his score. Quick post-video edit, I forgot this while I was initially recording, but Pete Buttigieg did actually serve in the military, so in the rise to popularity section we will actually be checking that box off. And if we apply the formula, after marking off these checkboxes, we will find that Pete Buttigieg's score is a respectable 71% on this scale. Next is Gavin Newsom, a Democrat who is governor of California. For this exercise, his archetype is a generic blue state governor. And let's begin to fill out Gavin Newsom's rubric now. I would say that Gavin Newsom would be perceived as most to be a relatively strong leader. Again, he is a Democrat, so pitching change to the Trump administration. And let's add Gavin Newsom's name up here. forgot to do that. I wouldn't say charisma is necessarily part of Gavin Newsom's appeal. Does not have military experience, and I would not say he is connected to any sort of popular previous administration. Again, the Biden administration was not particularly popular. Again, he is proposing significant changes. Not a fiscal conservative, but definitely on labor, right, civil rights for minorities, and the social safety net. These are positions that Democrats commonly hold, so it'll be very common to see the Democratic candidates in this exercise holding those positions. In terms of foreign policy, again, very common Democratic position is this option, balanced and cautious approach, a combination of force and peacemaking, not too uncommon in this day and age. Political alignment, I would say that Gavin Newsom is probably more left-wing than he is moderate, although he is probably more moderate than other Democratic candidates. I forgot to do this one. Gavin Newsom does support free trade. And by the time the election rolls around, Gavin Newsom would be... By the time the election rolls around, Gavin Newsom will be in this 60 to 62 section, and in October of 2028 he will turn 60, so he would be in the 60 to 62 section, because we are using the age of the candidates when it is election day. And Newsom's score comes out to a 62%, which is certainly not the best score, worse than we saw from Buttigieg, a different Democrat, and we'll see how that compares to future scores. Next is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, a Democrat who is in the House of Representatives. For this exercise, her archetype is progressive. Alright, let's begin filling this out. For Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, an archetype of a progressive candidate that might enter this race. I would not say being perceived as a strong leader is necessarily part of Ocasio-Cortez's appeal. She definitely is pitching change to the electorate, though probably more so than any other candidate. Definitely seen as charismatic. Does not have military experience, and it probably would not be connected in the public eye to a popular previous administration. She is connected in the public eye with Bernie Sanders, who is a relatively popular figure, but that does not count as a previous administration, so we'll skip it. In terms of domestic policy, she is definitely proposing significant changes in all of the major sections that Democrats focus on. Obviously not fiscal conservatism, that'll be more for the Republican side of things. In terms of foreign policy, it would presumably be the one that most of these candidates are going to share. She would support free trade. Political alignment, she is absolutely a progressive. That was listed as her archetype, so she will get 4 points for that. And then she will be younger than 42 years old by the time the election rolls around, so that will be 0 points in that section. And AOC's score comes out to a 58%, which is certainly not good. Only about 4 points higher than President Trump's score, which could seem to indicate a pattern that more polarizing candidates score lower on this scale, but we'll have to wait and see as we continue with the other candidates on this list. Next is Vivek Ramaswamy, a Republican who is an entrepreneur and candidate for governor of Ohio for 2026. For this exercise, his archetype is far right. Alright, let's begin filling out for our first Republican candidate, Vivek Ramaswamy, who entered into politics when running for president in 2024. Perceived as a strong, capable leader, that one is debatable. I will skip that one, but I think that one is that is a pretty subjective category. But like AOC, I will skip it. I would say that Ramaswamy is very similar to AOC, just on the opposite party end. They're both more like populist candidates. It's just one is for the left and one is for the right. Pitching change to the electorate. I will say pitching change to the electorate. He does support President Trump, certainly, but many of his policy proposals go farther than Trump, so it would still be change. He would definitely be seen as charismatic. That's one of his main selling points. And he is connected to the public eye. Depends on whether Trump's administration by the end will be popular or unpopular. I will click the box for now, although that could end up not counting if in 3 years Trump's administration is unpopular. Proposing significant changes, I will say no, he is not proposing significant changes, but definitely will still be focusing on the issue of fiscal conservatism. That'll our first candidate that will be focusing on that issue, and will also go on the social safety net because of his proposals on things like on the programs such as like Medicaid or Social Security, things like that. In terms of foreign policy, Ramaswamy's foreign policy definitely would not be an interventionist one, we would say. More of a balanced approach. Like before, definitely more skeptical of free trade, just as Trump is, and politically aligned definitely with solidly right-wing positions, and he will be, I believe he will be younger than 42 by the time Election Day rolls around, so that would give him 0 points. Actually, in 2028, he will be turning 42, so that is incorrect. He actually gets 3 points for that. He'll be 42 to 49 years old. And Ramaswamy will finish with a 55% score, so almost exactly the same as President Trump, which makes sense considering they are very close on that side of the political spectrum, and they are both quite polarizing figures, and that does seem to be a pattern. The polarizing figures are scoring lower. Next is Marco Rubio, a Republican who is Secretary of State and a former senator. For this exercise, his archetype is a moderate conservative. Alright, so for Rubio, we have a look at a different type of Republican candidate. I would say that Rubio's leadership skills as Secretary of State, as a diplomat, is much more a focus of his campaign than would be for Ramaswamy. Pitching change to the electorate, I would say probably not. Rubio would likely be more of a continuation of Trump's policies. In terms of the policy section, being seen as charismatic, not really a big part of Rubio's plan. Military experience, again, not really, and then we will click connected to the public eye is a popular past administration for now, although Trump's administration may not necessarily be popular by the time this election rolls around. He will not be proposing significant changes, although he will be focusing on fiscal conservatism. Again, that does not cover very many areas, but Rubio does not have strong positions on changes. Foreign policy, definitely more balanced. That is definitely one of Rubio's strengths. He is the Secretary of State. Foreign policy is a big portion of his career. Politically aligned, I would say that he does have solidly right-wing positions, but as more of a comparison or as more of a contrast to other candidates, is probably one of the more moderate candidates in this field, so we will call him a moderate. And then in terms of age, Marco Rubio will be in his 50s during this time, around the prime age for presidents to be. Quick post-recording note, I forgot to mention the question of free trade, but we would assume that Rubio would carry on the Trump line of policymaking, which would be skeptical of free trade, so that will be 3 points for Rubio in that section. And with the formula applied, Rubio will get 58%, matching Ocasio-Cortez and slightly besting both Trump and Ramaswamy, although also not a very good score. So far, not a lot of great scores, a lot of 50s and 60s, and really only one good score, and that was Pete Buttigieg at the beginning, but we'll see if we get any better scores as we move forward. Next is Josh Shapiro, a Democrat who is governor of Pennsylvania. For this exercise, his archetype is a popular swing state governor. Alright, Josh Shapiro is one of the more trendy picks to be the Democratic nominee in 2028. Let's see how he does with these with this rubric. So I would say Shapiro is perceived as a strong, capable leader. He is definitely pitching change to the electorate as a Democrat post-Trump. I would say he would be seen not necessarily as charismatic, but definitely confident and poised, so we will select that one. Would not be connected to the public eye for any previous administration, as none of the Democrats really able to do that. No military experience. In terms of domestic policy, he would be proposing significant changes, although not as significant, but it would still be significant changes considering this is a follow-up to the Trump administration, definitely on the issue of rights for minorities, not necessarily on healthcare and safety net, but probably on labor. In the foreign policy section, balanced, cautious approach. This will likely be every single candidate, unless I'm forgetting one who will not be. In terms of political alignment, this will definitely be our first moderate Democrat. That is one of the reasons that Shapiro is such a trendy pick to be the nominee, and why he is such a popular governor in Pennsylvania, which is obviously a swing state. And as for Shapiro's age, Shapiro would be right in the prime spot. He will be in his 50s, which is among the best age for presidents to be. Plenty of experience, but not too old, which is why it's worth 5 points. Another post-recording note on free trade. Sorry about that, but Josh Shapiro does support free trade, so that would be 7 points for him. And it does seem that Shapiro is a trendy pick for the nomination for good reason, as he scores an 84%, which is by far the highest score we have seen. It blows out of the water that around 70% that Pete Buttigieg got, and absolutely demolishes the scores in the 50s and 60s that we saw for most of our other candidates. Next is Stephen A. Smith, an independent who is a popular sports commentator and would likely seek the Democratic Party nomination if he were to run for president. For this exercise, his archetype is a political outsider. Alright, so it's time to talk about Stephen A. Smith. No one really knows what his plans are, but he has definitely been floated as an almost like independent/left-wing figure akin to someone like Trump, more like a brash political style. Obviously, it will be tough to rate him considering his political positions are very fluid and not easily accessible. Certainly in his rise to popularity, he will be pitching chains, definitely charismatic, is connected to the public eye to a popular previous administration. He is not, but he is connected. I am going to give him those points because he is certainly connected to the public eye and is popular, just not for any political reason, more just through, it's almost like the previous administration is his platform on ESPN. He is pretty recognized. In terms of domestic policy, it's safe to say he'd be proposing significant changes considering he will be following up Trump, although we don't exactly know what it would be on, so I'm not going to click on any of those things. It's not exactly known. It certainly wouldn't be fiscal conservatism, but we don't know the extent of his policy plans for things like healthcare or rights for minorities. Labor, I would say rights for minorities could probably be checked off. LGBTQ rights, diversity initiatives, that sort of thing. Although he has voiced his opposition for quote wokeness, so whether or not either side of the issue he is on, that will still seem to be a focus, but other than that we don't know much. In terms of foreign policy, we also don't really know anything, although we can probably assume it would be the balanced, cautious approach, since this is the approach that most presidents, or most candidates, but most of the good presidents also followed. In terms of political alignment, we will give him moderate position since he holds both left-wing and right-wing views. And in terms of age, Stephen A. Smith would turn 60, or would be 61 at the election, so that would bid him in the 60 to 62 years old category, which is 2 points. And before I make you think that I forgot free trade again, I'll just jump in and say that I am not sure whether to put him in the support or skeptical category, so I just skipped it, so he'll be receiving 0 points. Well, it seems that Stephen A. Smith will not be scoring any higher than other candidates, as he comes in with a 52%, which is the worst score we've recorded. It is lower than any other candidate that we've gotten so far. It's also 2 points lower than current President Trump, so it seems another polarizing figure that does not do too well in this exercise. Finally, we have J.D. Vance, a Republican who is vice president and a former senator. For this exercise, his archetype is a generic Republican, the one most aligned with Trump and the party line. All right, J.D. Vance is definitely considered the Republican frontrunner over the other two candidates and any other candidate that I didn't cover today. So let's see how he scores on this list. Is he best Trump? Does he best his other Republican opponents? I mean, that wouldn't be that hard considering how low they scored. We will see. Perceived as a strong and capable leader, he is the vice president. We will say yes on that one. Pitching change to the electorate, that will not be happening. It is a direct successor to Trump as his vice president. He would be if he were to win the election. He would not be pitching a significantly different vision. Definitely seen as charismatic. That was one of his main selling points during the 2024 election. He has served in the military, and we will select the last one. Consider we are just going to do that for all of the Republican candidates, although it is not necessarily true, but we will do that for now. In terms of domestic policy, they will not be proposing significant changes, although there will be an element of fiscal conservatism, and certainly we can see, and certainly on the social safety net, as Medicare cuts are up right now in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, so that certainly is an element of the fiscal conservatism, so we will highlight that. In terms of foreign policy, we would say probably a more balanced approach. Certainly not total neutrality, but definitely a more isolationist path that Trump has begun. In terms of free trade, definitely skeptical of free trade and in league with Trump on that position. In terms of political alignment, J.D. Vance is definitely a mostly conservative and holds solidly right-wing positions. In terms of his age, J.D. Vance is quite young. He would be in this 40s category, 42 to 49, by the time the election rolls around. I believe he probably will best his other Republican opponent, and J.D. Vance does end up having the highest score among the Republicans with 59%, although that is still not great and does fall behind some of the other Democratic candidates, but it does show that J.D. Vance would be in the lead according to this rubric for the Republican nomination. Now let's head in and see how all of the final results stack up against each other. Let's go through our candidates from worst scores to the best score. In last place, we have the sports commentator Stephen A. Smith, who is a registered independent but would likely run as a Democrat. Not exactly surprising, considering he would probably be the least qualified candidate in the race, although he is a political outsider, so he still has the potential to pull off an upset, just like Trump did back in 2016, although based on this rubric, it doesn't seem as if he would be a very unifying or great president. In seventh place, we have Vivek Ramaswamy at 55%, also not a very good score, another very polarizing, very Trump-esque figure, a pretty far to the right, not a very moderate candidate, and it seems that did not translate very well. Similarly, in sixth place, we have Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez at 58%. Again, pretty progressive and far to the other side of the political spectrum as Ramaswamy. Not moderate, and moderates seem to benefit in this exercise, so people far to the other side of the political spectrum not doing very well. Tied for sixth place with the same score as AOC, but we'll say fifth place for him, is Marco Rubio. Same score, like I said, 58%. Rubio suffers less from being an extremist, but more so the fact that one of his presidency probably would not change much, not really advertising much change, more of a continuation of the status quo, which is not necessarily led to many of the great presidents that I mentioned at the very beginning, the 10 presidents that we emulated this list based off of. In fourth place, we have J.D. Vance at 59%, the current vice president. So in this case, he would be the Republican nominee if we were to take all of these candidates. Still not a great score. Still not pretty far to the right, not as far to the right as Ramaswamy. So not the most moderate, not really advocating for any change, as he'd be a direct continuation of Trump as Trump's vice president. In third place, we're finally going to crack 60 with Gavin Newsom. The Democrats still relatively left-wing, not super popular, but he kind of ends up being kind of like this middle ground. He's not a super extreme, and he offers change. He's more of like a baseline. Like his archetype was kind of like generic blue state governor. He doesn't really seem to be a candidate that would be exceptionally great, but also not one that would be exceptionally terrible. And then our top two are really the only ones who showed much promise. At number 2, we have Pete Buttigieg, more of a progressive, very charismatic, definitely leaning on that charismatic archetype, showing that charisma combined with more left-wing policies can definitely be more popular, although it wasn't with AOC, as AOC definitely leans more to the left than Buttigieg, but more like not moderate, but in between a moderate and a progressive type vibe. For Buttigieg, he scores a 71%, definitely our first solid score, but then by far the best score in first place was Josh Shapiro with 84%. Moderate Democrat, swing state governor, definitely checking all the boxes. A trendy pick to be the nominee already, was definitely almost the vice presidential nominee in 2024, and Shapiro definitely fulfills many of the requirements that we'll be looking for. He offers change, but also doesn't offer anything that would be alienating to a ton of people. He offers a middle path that would be appealing to a wide swath of the country, and that is why he is really the only candidate. Maybe you could say Buttigieg scored well, but Shapiro definitely the only candidate who had anything close to a good score. So it seems the conclusion to be drawn from these results, in which Josh Shapiro easily scored first, is that governing from the middle is the right path to emulate some of our nation's greatest leaders. However, many of the very best past presidents still did challenge the status quo, which is why a charismatic left-wing messenger like Pete Buttigieg also manages to score much higher than anyone else, obviously, except for Shapiro. And the rubric certainly knows what route not to take in terms of picking a president, because all the candidates on the far side of their political spectrum, you're talking far right like Ramaswamy, more of a farther left like AOC, garnered pretty bad scores, and candidates unwilling to embrace change from the status quo that will be at the end of the Trump administration, like Rubio or Vance, more members of the Republican Party that wouldn't change much, also saw their scores suffer because of that. Since the electorate often craves change, it's why midterms often go to the opposing party, stuff like that. But for the TLDR, Josh Shapiro is the ideal next president based on the historical patterns of America's greatest leaders. Thanks for watching this much longer video, and I'll see you in the next one.